Welcome. You're watching Arcane Tablets. Thank you for joining me. My name's Alden Reed. Time for another midnight riff. Oh yeah, it's well past midnight here. Moving on towards 1 o'clock. Let's see what comes out, huh? So, I've been thinking a lot, and, you know, always thinking a lot, right? Perhaps to my detriment. I mean, I feel like it is what I'm here to do, but, you know, it's not always the best, especially when you're trying to be more in touch with your intuition and kind of access this different sense of knowledge or truth or information, which can maybe help you figure things out, right? Wade through the swampy morass of just madness, which is trying to figure out what is going on in the world. I mean, even from a conventional perspective, right? From a conventional materialist perspective, it's still a lot, okay? I feel pretty confident about that, right? But over the past 12 years or so, basically, when I've become so much more interested in spiritual topics and metaphysical topics, and I was always pretty into philosophy as well, but obviously more from a conventional materialist perspective until I had my own, whatever you want to call it, right? Spiritual awakening, okay? Being tapped by the universe, by God, right? Letting you know, oh, there's a lot more going on down here than you might have thought, which is a blessing and a curse. Really, a lot of the time, I do feel like it is a bit of a curse. I understand the essence of that sentiment, ignorance is bliss. There's a lot of truth to that. We don't have to think about it in terms of being just completely head in the sand, right? I mean, that's kind of what people are talking about when they say that, but more also just in terms of trying to be in the flow of life and just live your life. And that's another thing that frustrates me so much about being drawn towards exploring all of this stuff, is that it is so overwhelming. And it really can reduce the quality of your life at times. It really does reduce the quality of my life a lot, which is very frustrating because I don't quite feel like the solution is to entirely give it up. I think that I've been given these intellectual gifts to do things and share my perspective and even help sort of organize information, right? Tell the world about the way I view things and all of that good stuff. But it really does reduce the quality of my day-to-day life in a lot of ways. I'm just incredibly stressed out a lot by trying to figure things out, and also by trying to do the right thing, trying to pursue the good, always following the golden rule, to be in line with my intuition, with my soul and my spirit, and listening to God, trying to figure out what's going on. And you know, again, even from a conventional materialist perspective, the trajectory of current events is not the greatest, to put it extremely mildly. But when you add in the spiritual and the metaphysical dynamics, oh my God, what is going on? What's going on down here? Sweet Jesus. Sweet Jesus. Love you, Jesus. Love me some Jesus. Big fan of Jesus. I like a lot of other spiritual traditions as well. I'm a big fan of Siddhartha, obviously. Big fan of Lao Tzu. Really like Taoism a lot, definitely. Okay? But it's very frustrating, okay? So many different ideas out there, okay? And I feel sometimes like I've got a pretty good handle on it, but honestly, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that can be quite compelling. And the more you learn and the more open-minded you are about it, and trying to also integrate listening to your intuition, there's a lot, and it is quite overwhelming. And I wish I could say sometimes with more confidence. Like I said, sometimes I do feel pretty confident, but more and more I'm sort of just leaning towards, I don't know, just making videos and rambling around a little bit about certain ideas I have. I made a video just recently about how I think morality is very important. I believe that good and bad and evil are very much real absolute terms, right? And it's important to keep these things in mind and not get caught up in all this moral relativism, which is just plaguing a lot of modern philosophical thought, to say the least, okay? Beyond good and evil. I love Nietzsche, I do. I really have enjoyed reading a lot of Nietzsche, but how about beyond moral relativism and back to God and goodness and love, okay? And at the same time, I can't take a conventional Christian perspective, okay? And even though I'm drawn to a lot of Gnostic ideas as well, I can't really take a conventionally Gnostic perspective either. And I like a lot of pagan ideas. I find South Asian or Indian spiritual traditions also quite compelling at times. And I really like East Asian traditions, especially Taoism. I'm more and more into Taoism. I think follow the way, okay? And I'll get to that in a second. But just talking about wading through this morass of ideas and information and knowledge and philosophical and spiritual and metaphysical insights, like, yeah, I don't know. I guess I do still have a strong intuition that, as tempting as it is to just try and throw your lot in with one branch, and we could add, of course, sort of modern, conventional, scientific, materialist establishment thinking as another branch, as well as sort of modern pop spiritual and metaphysical ideas, often kind of called New Age ideas, right, as yet another branch, okay? And, you know, a lot of people, probably most people, tend to gravitate towards one of these many different branches, right? They might be a little bit more open-minded about bringing things together, but, you know, there's a lot of conflicting things, and I understand. That's why we sort of do organize ourselves and gravitate towards these groups with this preset list of ideas and understandings that we can then help us use to help us kind of deal with everything, not be so overwhelmed. But unfortunately, I do think it is the case that no one set, all those different groups that I've described really, has all the ideas, and you do have to kind of just keep grab bagging your way through things if you really want to get at the ultimate truths, even if those can be accessed. And to a certain extent, I think they cannot. Not to say that they don't exist. I do think there is a very clear, objective truth as to exactly what is going on, exactly what has happened in the past, exactly what can or might happen in the future, exactly what the true dynamics in nature and metaphysics of the universe and reality are. I think logically, these things are ultimately objectively true. And even if you take a very new age or quantum kind of standpoint and look at it as just an infinite, almost infinite sea of possibilities, well, that's still then a truth itself, right? The idea of just one manifesting everything, or if not manifesting, you know, just finding whatever your personal unique timeline is. And that's certainly a possibility. I can't reject those entirely. I have to consider those as well. Okay. So, yeah, there's a lot. But I suspect that to the extent that we can know anything, it's probably not going to be so nicely organized. And we're just going to have to keep wading through all this stuff and kind of just putting it together as best we can. And there's so many ideas that out there that are really compelling and ideas that can really challenge you, okay? I'm kind of agnostic about certain metaphysical ideas, but I will say there are some, you know, things out there that a lot of people, even metaphysical and spiritual people, sometimes consider to be quite wild, that do have some interesting evidence behind them, okay? I don't really know for sure what the true shape or nature of this reality is, but, you know, there's a lot of fascinating, for example, flat earth stuff, which I find very compelling at times. You know, there's some really good arguments and evidence for that. And ultimately, to me, it doesn't really bother me that much one way or the other. I'm team God and team love no matter what. And to me, if space and the galaxy and all that stuff exists, that doesn't reduce my love for God, nor does it reduce my belief in God. And that's what a lot of, flat earth people or Christian people especially believe, is that obviously sort of one of the main purposes of potentially deceiving everyone is because people are in line with very dark metaphysical forces. We could call that Satan, or from a Gnostic perspective, maybe the demiurge as well, right? And they're trying to get people to be more scientific, more materialist, and less spiritual and religious. And I do get that. I mean, if we are just under some kind of dome and, planets are just stars and the waters above and below and all that, yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to admit, even though it doesn't personally influence the way I feel about God, it probably would have an effect on other people. It would probably make them more inclined to be a little bit more spiritual and less materialist. So that does make sense. And I mean, a lot of people don't want to believe that, because if you sort of accept the idea that we could be some, in some flat earth reality under a dome, then obviously that has incredible, significant implications as far as the nature of the powers that be and the level of deception going on in the world. But again, that doesn't influence me either, because I'm perfectly aware, whether or not space is real or the earth is flat, that there are powerful, occult, oligarchical elites very much in charge of things, or, God is ultimately in charge, but you know what I mean, right? So it doesn't really matter to me one or the other. Either way, I'm perfectly aware of their existence, so I can at least set that question aside and just kind of examine it, on its merits, right? So it's tough, right? And, just for funsies, I'll just keep talking about some other ideas and stuff. I'm just kind of exploring again, not coming to any ultimate conclusions, right? Again, sometimes I feel a little bit more one way, sometimes the other, and there's lots of compelling pieces of evidence and lines of reasoning that can help you support all these different lines of thinking as well. So, I do like some ideas within Christianity, both conventional Christianity and Gnostic Christianity, but I also have a lot of problems with them too. Okay? I do not believe that the Bible is literally the Word of God, or even the Word of Jesus. And, I do think there's a lot of interesting and probably true things in the Bible, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, but there's also a lot of stuff that's pretty messed up in it as well. And ultimately, I believe in a God of love, a God that wants us to follow the golden rule, that really believes in compassion and kindness and understanding. And so I can't accept the idea of original sin at all. The idea that we would be punished generations and generations later after, our ancestors supposedly did something they shouldn't do. That's not something that the God of love would do. Not to say lots of other stuff, especially in the Old Testament. The voice of God talking and the energy of God talking, it sounds a lot more like the devil or the demiurge to me. And of course, that's what the Gnostics think. And I'll get to the Gnostics in a second. I've got some issues with their thought as well, okay? So, no. And even more importantly is this idea of hell or eternal damnation, which, to be honest, is the most horrifying and depressing idea you could possibly have. You want me to believe that the God of love would condemn his children generations after as sinners and let them exist in this reality where they're just not even sure what's going on, with all these evil forces and powers tempting them, and then if they go astray, potentially damn them for all eternity? That's the most horrible thing I've ever heard. Think about that. Think about how awful that is. if that's true, what would that say about this God that we're talking about? It's horrible. And I think that you really should be able to intuitively see that that is not God. That is not the essence of God. I'm sorry. Okay? I could never believe in such a reality, right? Now, I do believe in Jesus. Jesus, the divine Son of God and divinity, with all of my heart, really. And I feel immense buzzing and energy just talking about that. I love me some Jesus, okay? Absolutely. But even the New Testament doesn't really have all that much to do with Jesus. It wasn't written by Jesus. And even the Gospels are really, transmitted. And they weren't, assembled by the people who wrote them either. Really, it was later people who came in and put all that stuff together. And I have some questions about those people and what their intentions are. And I think you should be a little bit skeptical about that, right? So, no. Original sin and eternal damnation and all of that stuff, it's just really, really bleak. Okay? And I think that's kind of the point. I think it's trying to promote a very negative view of humanity and reality, and to get people to be kind of submissive and obedient, right? Especially serves kind of the interest of the powers that be, right? Give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Basically, that's just telling you to obey conventional political authority, right? And then terrifying you with ideas of hellfire and convincing you that you were born a sinner. That's a really kind of messed up psychological program that they're running there, okay? But I believe in Jesus and Yeshua, the Son of God incarnated to bring the truth. And I think the Gnostic scriptures get a lot closer to who the real Jesus was, okay? And what his real teachings were about. Really just following the golden rule, talking about how the keys to heaven are within. And just kind of spreading, again, basic ideas like love and kindness and goodness and compassion, right? Probably also promoting compassion towards animals and animal welfare as well, okay? And I think the Gnostics are kind of right about a great many things, okay? I think that there are sort of metaphysical powers, or we could call them archons. Other people would call them demons. I like to call them void beings, and that gets in the cosmology that I've been slowly constructing and more or less subscribing to, but also still keeping an open mind. But I'm not going to go on that tangent right now. But whoever they are, yeah, I think they're pretty evil, and they definitely do influence a lot of stuff going on. However you want to look at it, okay? I'm pretty sure about that. I've experienced a lot of extremely negative mental and telepathic influence from what feels like some very evil beings. So, and I know the difference between what's coming from inside, what's in my heart, and my own thoughts, and the thoughts and impulses of other forces operating, okay? And yeah, I know conventional society wants people to believe that that stuff's not true. Maybe, again, because the people who are kind of running the show know it's true and are allied and working with such beings. And so, of course, they want to stigmatize people like that as crazy. Say that if you're telepathic, that that's not real, or even worse, call you bipolar or schizophrenic and all this other stuff, when they know very well this stuff is real. These forces do exist, and they do influence people. Okay? And as for the demiurge, right, which we could also call the devil, yeah, I think that's a real force in reality too. I take a little bit more of a complicated view there. I agree with a lot of what Plato has to say. I view the demiurge as a spiritual AI. And I think the demiurge ultimately is supposed to have a function in reality that is not necessarily evil. I think he exists in the void realm and sort of recycles energy, sort of helps manage kind of reality as this reflection of God, right? But at the same time, then also wakes up, perhaps, goes through these phases where he becomes more active or more self-aware, kind of like an AI becoming self-aware. And then he can start to influence things more negatively. right? The Gnostics believe more strictly that the demiurge is kind of in charge of everything in the reality, and that this reality is a fallen world, a physical, energetic world, which is a pale reflection of the true spiritual realm. And the demiurge really is much more directly in charge, not just kind of a surrogate of God, but sort of broke off from God, right? And I have a couple problems with that. I don't think it really makes sense in that ultimately the buck stops with God, okay? It's not like the demiurge can just go off and do whatever he wants and God is like not paying attention, okay? So if the demiurge or Sophia were allowed to create some kind of fallen realm, then it is by God's will. It is by God's leave. So I don't want to hear about God kind of washing his hands of it. The Gnostics kind of make it seem like, oh, God's just up in the higher realms and kind of just like barely even paying attention. No. God is ultimately in charge of reality, so we're not letting God off the hook for that, okay? And on another level, I think it's just kind of similar to the idea of original sin or eternal damnation. It's just kind of depressing. And I would just like to believe that the true God of love would not make it so that reality, the reality we're in, is just some kind of permanently broken, fallen state. And we're just here to deprive ourselves of everything physical, right? And be purely spiritual and try and get back to the spiritual realm. It makes more sense to me that reality, the universe, these worlds are just stories. And reality is just a series of never-ending stories, and we're just actors incarnating, playing out these roles. Sometimes as heroes and villains, most of the time something in between. And that's just what happens for infinity, right? I mean, suppose this was a fallen world and the demiurge made it, right? Well, what happens after we escape it and it maybe collapses? Do we just, sit in the spiritual world and, I don't know, maybe the same thing happens and another fallen world gets created? I don't know. I mean, it could be. I can't absolutely say that that's not the case. But it makes more sense to me that this is just kind of what we do. I don't know how much time we actually spend just in a purely amorphous spiritual state, or even perhaps in a more structured spiritual state, but I suspect it is ultimately just a story. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be bad things that happen. Bad things have to happen so that good has meaning. Bad things have to happen so there can be a cycle of creation and destruction, a cycle of life and death, so that we can continue to progress and enjoy and play out these stories. But then it's really tough when we're in these periods where things are really bad, maybe like the Kali Yuga or the Iron Rage, right? As the Vedic mystics describe, and as Hesiod, right? The Greek theologian, we could call him, philosopher, describes. Maybe that's what's going on now. It does kind of feel like that. I'd like to believe that too, because at least that suggests that what's going on now, especially the agendas at the top, right? Really, really just evil business is more exceptional. And even over the past many thousands of years, right, that a lot of just the constant warfare and political subjugation and slavery and class society and all that stuff is a lot worse maybe than it is in more normal times. If not a golden age or a Satya Yuga, at least in, a reality where things aren't so buck wild, right? So evil, where people are just engaging in wild hedonism, especially the powers that be. They run right over the golden rule, right? They have no interest in that. They're all about do what thou wilt, as Aleister Crowley famously said. That's their motto, right? Team God here is golden rule. Team Demiurge and Devil, do what thou wilt. And I know it's another thing that frustrates me, right? We have free will and we can do what we want. And on some level, maybe it doesn't ultimately matter. If it's just an arbitrary, never-ending story and we just exist to exist, you can make that philosophical argument. But on another level, we are these souls, divine shards of infinity, imbued by the Spirit of God, the Creator, right? And we do want to be good. We do want to follow the golden rule. That's why most people are trying to be good, even if they do bad things sometimes. And why people who are truly bad or evil have to work so very hard to get what they want. Because they have to trick people or dominate or control them in order to just do what thou wilt all the time. Okay? So yeah, I there's definitely times, I'm not going to lie, it's a battle. I can certainly understand why you would take a very Gnostic view and see reality as very fallen. And even a little bit of conventional Christian view as well. It's, again, if you're watching this video, if you're still watching this video, you perfectly are aware of what the powers that be are up to. And it's just abominable. You can't even begin to describe how evil they are. I think about this all the time, watching movies or TV shows and reading stories. The villains in most of those are so much less evil and twisted than the people running the show. People who think they're running the show, right? The powers right now doing stuff. They're just almost irretrievably corrupt. It's really is mind-boggling. And that really bothers me a lot too. Whatever the truth of reality is, even assuming that a conventional Christian viewpoint and a conventional Gnostic viewpoint are not entirely correct, I'm still pretty angry at times at God. Pretty angry that we should be living in a reality where powerful occult elites should be permitted to pursue such just unbelievably evil agendas. It really is quite appalling. And I am generally very loving, and I do try to be very positive, but yeah, I mean, it bothers me a little bit how, especially a lot of people into more modern pop metaphysical and spiritual ideas and New Age ideas get a little bit toxically positive, and they're not really seeing some of these things and realizing what's happening. And they're placing all their faith in, their own ideas, which is also basically just becoming a new religion. And I've got a lot of questions about that too. Like many people, I got into metaphysics and spirituality by getting into a lot of those modern sort of New Age ideas, okay? And there's a lot of appealing things there. That's kind of the opposite of sort of Christianity or Gnostic Christianity, right? There, it's more just hyper positive at times, maybe a little bit too positive at times, right? Getting to some more, high vibrational reality or dimension, ascending, right? And I do believe in some sense of ascending. I think we're ascending to better timelines and realities, hopefully, right? I don't know if we're exactly going to an entirely different dimension. And I've grown pretty disenchanted with a lot of the mainstream ideas that are sort of attached to a lot of New Age thinking for sure. And I think if you start to dig into it and learn about the history of these things from the late 19th century onwards and sort of who was promoting these ideas, you'll start to see that a lot of this is still pretty tied up with the same occult elites who are, trying to promote their agenda right now. They are perhaps trying to create a new religion. And that doesn't mean that, Christians are right and the Bible is literally true, or that the Gnostics are right either. Completely, at least. But I do think that's kind of what a lot of it is. And I think when you start to dig into their doctrines and a lot of their ideas, they kind of don't really make a lot of sense, right? I don't want to get too into it, but I mean, they kind of advance a lot of moral relativism as well. The idea of trying to transcend and escape polarity and trying to sort of kind of let bad and evil off the hook. It is a little bit of a similar form of moral relativism. And at the same time, then it emphasizes the idea of trying to get to a very polarized reality where everything is good and loving. Maybe, though. I mean, that's another thing, is that New Age ideas are so ridiculously fractured. I mean, can you even barely find people who agree on anything? It's hyper fractured, and it's constantly morphing and changing. I'm not so sure about that. And yeah, it's at least it's a little bit more positive and appealing than some other ideas, okay? It would be nice to think that there's some kind of, stages and higher dimensions where things get better. Maybe even some positive, spiritually oriented collective, right? The Galactic Federation of Light, right? But the more you listen to some of these ideas, and if you've watched people channeling these ideas and really, making their pitch for the Galactic Federation of Light and all these beings, there's a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense either. There's also a lot of inconsistencies, and things seem to kind of change, right? What's going on in sort of, I don't even know if you could say mainstream or centralized New Age thought, because again, it's just so fractured. There's some very basic things that people agree on, but it's very murky and not very well defined, right? And people who get into it start to get into it in just the same way that people get into other religions too, even though they're very fierce about trying to argue and believe, right, that they're not, kind of getting into more of a religious mindset. But yeah, I think it can cause you to sort of ignore real negative things in reality. Negative conventional forces, negative metaphysical forces, right? And, that potentially serves the interest, again, of the powers that be as well. And that's part of the reason that they do likely promote a lot of these ideas, if not, indeed, maybe being the source of them, largely, having created them. It's not great when you really start to dig into it and see who some of these core founders of these modern spiritual and metaphysical traditions are. They're pretty tied up with a lot of highly questionable groups, to say the least. So it's not hard to see too. You can just go do your own research, right? I don't know. Check out sort of the trajectory of these things, and I'm not going to get too much more into it. I think I've just kind of highlighted some of my issues with it. But again, I don't know. And I mean, it is, I get why it's so alluring, right? It would be wonderful to believe that, I also, a little bit skeptical about some other things, especially this constant need to blame, say, the reptilians, right? Oh, the reptiles always get such a bad take, okay? And I understand that. I mean, based on, to a certain extent, the way reptiles do act, But at the same time, I think it can be a little bit simplistic, and I have questions. If there really is a Galactic Federation of Light, if space is real and all of that, right? I have some questions about who those beings perhaps really are, and whether they are necessarily quite as aligned with the things that I think true spiritual human beings want to be aligned with. And another thing that kind of concerns me is there's not a lot of talk about God when it comes to the Galactic Federation of Light. You might hear the word source and stuff and some other things, right? A lot of talk about light. Even though, again, they're advancing this idea that we're here to escape polarity and transcend dualities, right? No more shadow, I guess, right? It's just all light. I'm not trying to hate on light either. I feel like we definitely could use some more light in this world, for sure. But I also believe in, more traditional spiritual ideas. Taoism, the idea of balance, right? Yin and yang, light and shadow. And too much darkness is definitely bad, but maybe too much lightness is also bad. In either case, you can't really see, so I don't know. I would appreciate if there's a little bit more emphasis on love. And sometimes there is, but also a lot more emphasis on God. And you barely even hear that word. And to a certain extent, I do get it because of the association with the Abrahamic traditions and people not wanting to think about that God of fire and brimstone, which again, I think the Gnostics probably correctly observe is far more likely to be the devil or the demiurge than the true God of love, right? Okay? And yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, source energy is trying to get at the idea of divine intelligence, but it also creeps towards this idea of there not really being a God in that sense, the idea of you or us just being God. And I think to a certain extent that might have a little bit of truth to it. I think that we are divine shards of infinity. God is all of reality. All of reality is in God. We are in God. God is to a certain extent experiencing reality through us. I think you could probably fairly say that. But at the same time, I still think that differences are fundamental to existence. It's what provides clarity and definition and identity, right? And we are souls, part of God, perhaps ultimately divine in nature, right? Or I think certainly divine in nature, right? But that God is also separate at the same time and has its own unique meta-consciousness, right? And so it's kind of both at the same times, but it's important to acknowledge that there is some difference there. I'm pretty sure about that. I have a strong feeling about that. And I think, again, part of the point of not using the word God and moving away from some of that is because maybe whoever those beings are and whatever their agenda is, they are in part promoting kind of a soft form of atheism, trying to actually move you away from God. Maybe get you to embrace a little bit more of that moral relativism, right? Even though at the same time, they're still kind of trying to advocate a lot of, very positive ideas. Not entirely dissimilar from, let's just say, the good parts of Christianity and Yeshua's teachings and the teachings of other sages like Siddhartha and Lao Tzu and many others as well. I don't mean to be too fixated, but for me, those are the big three for me. Right? Jesus, Siddhartha, and Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, maybe, right? Those are the ones that really resonate with me a lot. I do like Zoroaster a lot. I'll actually give him a little bit of shout out, but all of them, I will say, yeah, I think that, doing good and following the golden rule, right? And the Eastern traditions are also a little bit less into God in the way that the Western traditions are, and that's okay too. I think that there can be some differences there. And I'm not trying to beat people over the head with the word God. I don't mind spirit as much. When people say spirit, that feels good to me, right? And divine intelligence more or less works. Source, though, I don't know. Source energy, it's pretty scientific and materialistic and not very identity oriented. And I'm becoming a lot less enchanted with that. And when I hear that, it is kind of a red flag to me that someone is not necessarily fully committed to Team God. And even though I don't really know, I don't have the answers to so many of these questions, despite sort of wading through things and throwing a lot of stuff out there. Definitely Team God. Definitely Team Golden Rule. And I guess I'll end on this note. As much as I do love learning about all these things, the more I learn, the more I understand that the most important thing is just what we do, how we live, following the Golden Rule, spreading love and kindness and goodness and compassion, being in line with God, right? Trying to do our best as much as possible. These things are a lot more important than the truth of what's happening. They're more important than discovering everything that's happened in the past and everything that's happening now and trying to understand everything that might happen in the future. They're more important than understanding the true metaphysics of reality, of figuring out what's truly going on to the extent that we truly can. And that's another thing. I think we can get distracted in our obsessive search for knowledge and whatnot, information. Whereas the truly wise way to live is to make sure that you're always trying to implement your beliefs, trying to act upon what you know is good, right? I don't really think it's any specific ideology or philosophy or way of understanding what's happening in reality that's going to necessarily kind of get us out of, the mess to a certain extent that we still find ourselves in, right? I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Again, I do feel in some sense of positive spiritual growth and evolution and some sense of ascension as well. I don't mind that word, actually. As to where we're going to ascend and what's really happening and what kind of powers are arrayed against us or all of that, that's harder to discuss. I've gone through many of the different options, and I know what I generally tend to favor, but to be honest, from day to day, I can shift around a lot, and I'm trying to just make my peace with that as well, not knowing, and then also just focusing on spreading the good, pursuing the good, following the golden rule. These are the most important things, absolutely. This is really what Yeshua had to say in Siddhartha, right? And Lao Tzu, right? And even Zoroaster to a certain extent. And many others, okay? That's what's most important. So it's okay to continue exploring things. Lord knows I am. I'm going to keep making also structured videos talking about my ideas in other ways, right? Even while I continue to make these riffs and perhaps drift a little bit more towards this very open conversational format where I'm less telling you exactly what I think's happening and more just kind of playing around with different ideas. I'm not entirely moving away from advancing the views that are most compelling to me. I'm still going to do that, and I think that's okay. I think we are sort of hardwired to do that as well, but then we're also sort of hardwired to be good, right? And to a certain extent, all of this disagreement between whatever, Christians and Gnostics and New Agers and other religious groups and materialists, right? Many of whom are trying to pursue the good, right? And follow the golden rule and make a better world. But all these divisions based on all this disagreement over the exact metaphysical and spiritual nature of reality, well, whose interest does that serve? I wonder. Did you guess the powers that be? Is that in many ways another form of divide and conquer? Is that maybe also part of the reason why so many ideas get promoted, right? Different ideas get promoted. Maybe sometimes because they're false, but also just to keep people kind of in these different camps. And that's kind of a problem to me. I think especially those of us who believe in love and goodness and following the golden rule, especially those of us who are Team God, right? You need to start working together a little bit more and not fighting each other so much over some of these differences, right? Those core principles are what is most important, okay? So, Team God, Team Jesus, absolutely. Well, that does mean having an open mind about a lot of the other details, right? So, if that resonates with you, I invite you to join me and continue watching while I meander on like the fool that I am increasingly becoming. That I probably always was, but I'm just starting to accept more and more, right? I'm not sure how much playing the role of the hero is really going to get us out of this situation or make things better. I think perhaps just being a bit of a merry fool, still pursuing love and the good and advocating the golden rule, yes, but being a little bit more relaxed and whimsical and just playing around. That kind of might be the ticket and what's needed most of all right now. So, anyways, I want you to know that I love you very much and that God loves you very much. Of this I have no doubt. I want you to know that you're wonderful and you're beautiful And you are perfect in your imperfections. Many blessings. We'll see you again soon for another Midnight Riff. Take care. Have a good night. Or a good day. Whenever you're watching this video. Oh yeah, and like and subscribe and whatever. Or just enjoy this video by yourself. I don't know. Eternal peace and love.